Today, we're diving deep into the history of New York's famous Lower East Side. And what we found, buried in old census records, is this incredible story of a hidden economy, a story of pure hustle and survival that all revolves around, of all things, the bagel. To really get a feel for this place, just listen to these words from 1896. The author Abraham Cahan called it a seething human sea. Just imagine that for a second. Streets so full of people, a constant flow of new arrivals from all over, every single one of them hoping to make it. This wasn't just a place to live, it was the starting line for a whole new life. All right, so let's get our bearings. The area we're focusing on was officially known as Ward 17. Today you'd know it as the East Village in the Lower East Side, but back in the mid-1800s, this was ground zero for immigrant life in America, period.
And when I say ground zero, I'm not exaggerating. The population density here was off the charts. We are talking about one of the most crowded places on the entire planet. Tens of thousands of people, all crammed into just a few city blocks, living, working, and building a community literally on top of one another.
So you have to wonder, right? Who were all these people? Where do they come from? How do they make a living? And what can their story really teach us about what it was like to be in this incredible, chaotic, and vibrant place?
Well, incredibly, we have a way to find out. And it's all thanks to this massive volunteer project that digitized the 1855 New York State Census for this exact neighborhood. This means we can go beyond just stories and look at the hard data. It's like a perfect snapshot of this world in motion.
And the very first number that just leaps off the page is this one. 62%. That's how many residents of Ward 17 were born outside of the United States. Let that sink in. This was, first and foremost, a neighborhood built by immigrants.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at where they came from, yeah, you had people from almost 40 different countries, but two groups really defined the neighborhood. You can see immigrants from the German states made up about 28%, and those from Ireland were right behind them at 24%. Just those two groups alone were more than half the entire population.
The census also gives us a clear picture of how people scraped by. The two biggest jobs by far were tailor and laborer, and you can even see how work was often divided along ethnic lines. The records show that the vast majority of tailors were German and most of the laborers were Irish. So, okay, the data gives us this amazing blueprint of the neighborhood. It's like the skeleton. But what about the heart and soul? What was it actually like to wake up every day and try to build a life here? It turns out, one of the biggest factors shaping daily life and the entire neighborhood economy was something really simple: space. Or more accurately, the complete and total lack of it. And it all started inside the tenement building. Just think about something as basic as baking bread, which would have been a daily ritual back home. In a Lower East Side tenement, forget about it. Your entire apartment was maybe 325 square feet. You had no oven, and if you needed water, you had to haul it up flights of stairs from a pump outside. The tenement kitchen simply wasn't built for actually cooking. And that right there is the key. Since you couldn't bake at home, you had to buy your food. This created a huge demand, and a whole commercial food industry sprang up to meet it. But where could you possibly set up a business? Well, the only affordable real estate was in the damp, dark basements of the tenement buildings themselves. And boy, did they spring up. This wasn't some niche thing. By the turn of the century, there were over 70 Jewish bakeries running in the basements of just one ward, all of them churning out cheap food for the thousands of people living upstairs. Food like, you guessed it, the bagel. So let's zoom in on the bagel, because its journey from baker to customer tells us everything we need to know. It actually reveals two completely separate economies, one that everyone saw and one that was totally hidden from sight. Okay, so first there's what you'd see on the street, the informal economy. These were the peddlers, often young boys or older women, people who had a hard time finding other work. They weren't employees. They'd just grab a bunch of bagels on commission and try to sell them on a street corner. No boss, no regulations, just pure hustle. But then, completely hidden downstairs, was the formal economy. The men who actually baked the bagels weren't self-employed. They were wage earners with a very specific skill. They had a boss, they had a contract, and they were part of a structured and frankly brutal industry that was happening right under everyone's feet.
So here's the entire supply chain. Production was done by men, hidden away in those basement bakeries. Then came distribution, handled by the public-facing peddlers. And finally, the sale on the street. It's really an early version of the gig economy, isn't it? You've got this flexible, commission-based sales force selling a product made by a fixed, invisible workforce. Two totally different worlds, both absolutely essential for this economy to even exist.
But we need to go back into that basement. Because for the men working in that formal baking economy, providing a cheap meal for their neighbors came at a devastating personal cost.
The work was unbelievably hard, but the conditions were something else entirely. In 1895, factory inspectors actually reported that no other industry, not even the infamous sweatshops, was carried on amid so much dirt and filth. This wasn't just tough work, it was dangerous, unhealthy, and disgusting. And you don't have to take their word for it. Listen to this account from a baker named Chaim Plumka. He talked about how bosses would use rotten eggs to save money, writing, "My hands became full of white worms. Some of the eggs gave a little burst when I cracked them open." It's just a stomach-turning look at how every last cent of profit was squeezed out of the system. And on top of all that filth, the workers were caught in what they called the vampire system. Here's how it worked. You had to get hired through a saloon where you were forced to spend your money. Then, your job required mandatory board and lodging, meaning you slept in the bakery itself, and the cost was taken right out of your pay. You're working up to 18-hour days, and you're trapped in a cycle of debt to the very person exploiting you. Which leaves us with a huge question. When you're trapped in a system that's designed from the ground up to bleed you dry, when you're living in a crowded tenement and working in a filthy basement, how do you even begin to find the power to fight back? The answer to that question would end up changing everything, not just for the bakers, but for the future of the entire labor movement.